So on Thanksgiving, we had the lovely opportunity to do the Nyungne practice, which in Tibetan means abiding in the fast. It's a practice where we hope to develop our love, compassion, bodhicitta through connecting in with the Buddha of compassion, Chenrezig. And I guess one of the notable features of this retreat, one of them, is the physical hardships, you could say we do, or the fasting. So on the first day, they're kind of in parts of, they're done in 2 and a bit day pairs. So on the first day, we only have one meal, and everything else is kind of normal. But on the second day, we abstain completely from food, drink, and talking. And so you could say that there is a level of asceticism in there, or some physical austerities. It was interesting this year doing it to see where I was with that. And it's actually not too hard, it's quite doable. There's an aspect that is definitely beyond what I normally do, but to control the body in that way is not so hard. And so it got me thinking about what really is austerities or asceticism. And for me, this relates to what Venerable Chödrön talks about in terms of what does retreat mean? Is it just retreating from the world or from our responsibilities in it? Or is it retreating from the afflictions? And so thinking about what real ascetic practice is, it brought me to the recommendation of the masters around if you're wanting to, anyone who's practicing the Chenrezig practice or anyone who's wanting to develop love, compassion, bodhicitta, there's 4 ascetic practices that they recommend that you commit to. And this is to not return insults with insults, to not return criticism for criticism or not pointing out someone's faults if they point out ours, to not return physical blows with physical blows, and to not return anger with anger. So it's a 4-part practice of non-retaliation. And when looking into this, to see what Venerable had to say about this, she points out that this is often the opposite of what we have society or our family has trained us to do. That if someone physically abuses us or threatens to harm us, it's only right that we return blows with blows to uphold our honor. Or that if someone insults us, they've opened the doorway for us to return that in kind. Or that we're justified in our anger towards someone, and that actually might be necessary to rise to that level in order to meet them where they are and subdue it or be right. But in any of these pathways of action or thinking, it's not so helpful in the short or the long term. So checking in with myself around where I am with these practices, I see that there's 2 particular ones that I struggle with. And that's returning criticism with criticism and returning anger with anger. And so returning criticism with criticism is more gross than just returning anger with anger, because it's actions flowing from the mind, not just working with the mind itself. So I'll start with that one. And I find it interesting that there's various levels that this can manifest. And on the more gross level, someone might actually be wanting to take a jab at us. Someone might be angry with something that we've done, and they're shooting out an insult. And in terms of that situation, I find it very funny to see that the immediate response is to want to jab back, to kind of turn the knife back on them, or kind of put them down a notch so I can make myself feel big once again. And just to see how fragile the ego is in that situation, that in response to someone else's opinions, they're just words, that I am reduced to wanting to harm back in kind, to return what I'm finding so painful in myself. And also just the belief I have in whatever's coming at me, that I just believe what they're saying is true in that moment with Yeah, I think to use an example is recently I got quite upset when someone made an assessment of my behavior or my thinking. And someone who came to help me was like, if someone says that there's horns on your head and you don't have horns on your head, why are you crying? It's like, I know I don't have horns on my head, but I'm still crying, and this is still painful. So just to see my own fragility in that moment was really helpful to ask myself, why respond in this way? It is not beneficial in any way. And then there's also another situation where this can arise, in where someone is actually trying to help us. They see a behavior or a way of thinking that is harmful, and they're not wanting us to experience the harm that will come, so they point out a fault. And so this is where it comes into seeing help as harm, a phrase that I've heard a few times here at the Abbey that is really helpful. And in general, seeing help as harm is not helpful. I see two levels of disadvantage. One in general is just that it stops or it's a barrier to maintaining good relationships with people in general. But as a spiritual practitioner in particular, I find it can be really harmful because it's kind of like a roadblock in terms of our progress along the path to awakening. Because as anyone who is wanting to attain the final goal of Buddhahood, then we've said, I have faults and I want to eliminate them. And so if we have someone who's pointing them out to us and we shoot them back, then how are we going to keep progressing along towards that goal? And I like the analogy of the mirror in this instance, in that it's very easy for us to see the dirt on other people's faces. But to see the dirt on our own face, we need to have a mirror. And we can have an internal mirror in terms of examining ourselves in the face of the Dharma, internally through meditation. But that can often be hard to do, or there might be resistance to doing that, or just a level of not knowing how, especially when we're beginners on the path. So then we need the external mirror of someone else, our kind friends who hold up the mirror to us so that we can see. And so then if we go ahead and smash that mirror, or we smear dirt all over the mirror by returning criticism towards that person, it's completely self-defeating. And so I found it interesting that when looking up these four ascetic practices, in Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, it comes under the 25 practices that you do in order to complete the collection of wisdom. And so this really pointed to me that these four ascetic practices of non-retaliation are bringing me closer in line with seeing reality as it is. And that someone who sees reality clearly would not respond to anger, insults, criticism, or physical harm in an afflicted way. They would either see a person who's under their own affliction, under the control of their own afflictions, who are incredibly suffering at that moment, and there's only the response for compassion in that case, or they'll see someone trying to help us. The response of retaliation has no place in that mind of wisdom. So coming to responding to anger with anger, I find much, much harder to work with. In my own state of practice, it feels almost instantaneous that when I perceive anger or feel I'm being met with anger, my own response is there. I can't yet, sometimes I can see the space between my perception and my reaction. Sometimes I can't. And very few times can I actually take a hold of that space and utilize it to counteract my anger in the first place. So at that level, I'm working with acceptance. That right now, when I'm met with anger, a lot of the time, anger arises in me. And to just see that right now I don't have the skills or the familiarity with this practice of the antidotes yet to stop it when it's in its infancy. But there's two important things to follow from that is, one, even when the anger arises, there is a lot that I can do to work with it then. But also to not get sidetracked in the distraction of beating myself up as a bad person for the anger having arisen in the first place. Because I found that I'm well versed in doing that, in kind of shifting my attention from the anger itself, going on this side trip about what a horrible person I am, I should be better than this. And then the anger actually is left to its own devices to grow in strength, and there's no counteractive force there because my attention's over here. So it's not helpful. Yeah. And so in terms of what to do then with that when that anger does arise, I again found it helpful with viewing the four ascetic practices as falling under the collection of wisdom, into using emptiness as an antidote, and to really ask, like, who is really angry here? Like, who is angry? Who is being harmed by the words that I'm perceiving? Or where really is the harm in the words that are coming at me? Because often I've played with this in terms of if those same words were said by a different person or in a different context, the way that I would take them would be completely different. So just to break the pie apart a little bit like that. And also to ask myself, what really is this anger? This feeling that I'm labeling as solid anger, to try and find what that is. Especially when I can feel this energy really wanting to react or to impel me to act in some way, to speak, to return the criticism, or to point out someone else's fault, or just to throw a little tantrum about how unfair it is that the situation that I find myself in. So I found this helpful to reflect on. And also in the book on compassion, Cultivating Compassion, that Venerable wrote, she said that in addition to I guess the wisdom aspect, it's important that to work with these four practices of non-retaliation is to do the meditations on bodhicitta repeatedly, that to enable us to actually enact these four pathways of non-retaliation. And so I was inspired yesterday by Venerable Chuni's advice around bringing in a fourth motivation to our daily practice, in terms of not only, as soon as I wake up in the morning, not only will I do no harm as much as I'm able with my body, speech, and mind, not only will I try and be as much benefit as possible with my body, speech, and mind, and I'll do that within the framework of aspiring to full awakening for the welfare of all sentient beings. But I'll start doing that in a really small but significant way by reflecting on my own and others' kindness each day. So hopefully my reflections on this are helpful. I found it very helpful just wrapping my mind around this in the last few weeks, and just gaining increasing confidence that anger in no way is helpful, no matter what we're faced with, and that I myself, and I think all those around me, are much happier when the mind of love, compassion, and bodhicitta is there. So maybe we all train ourselves in that.